What if I told you that ancient holy books, written thousands of years ago, might contain descriptions of modern cosmology? It's a pretty mind-blowing claim, right? Well, that's exactly what we're going to dig into today. The verses, the science, and the really intense debate that surrounds it all.
Okay, so let's start with a big one. This verse from the Quran. Proponents of this idea look at this and say, wow, this is an incredibly clear description of an expanding universe, something, science only figured out in the 20th century. This one sentence is a huge part of their argument.
So that's the big question, isn't it? How could this possibly be? Is it a miracle, a sign of divine revelation, or maybe just a wild poetic coincidence? To even begin to answer that, we've got to understand both the science and the scripture.
Right, so to really get why these claims are so powerful, you first have to appreciate just how revolutionary the idea of an expanding universe actually was. I mean, this discovery didn't just add a new chapter to the book of science, it threw the whole book out and started over.
For pretty much all of human history, the smartest people on the planet just assumed the universe was, well, static. It had always been there, it would always be there. No beginning, no end. And look, this wasn't some fringe idea. This was the default setting for almost everyone, including Albert Einstein when he first started out.
And what's really wild is just how fast that whole static model fell apart. In less than a human lifetime, everything changed. First, Einstein's own math suggested the universe shouldn't be static. Then, Lemaitre proposed it all started from a single point. A couple of years later, Hubble looks through his telescope and sees it happening. He gets the proof. And then, the final nail in the coffin was the discovery of this faint, leftover heat from the Big Bang itself. Just an incredible scientific revolution.
So you've got to understand, the Big Bang isn't just some wild guess. It's a theory that's propped up by 4 totally separate, solid pillars of evidence. You've got galaxies flying away from us, the math that predicts it, that faint radiation glow from the beginning of time, and the fact that the universe has the exact mix of light elements that the model says it should. It's a really solid case.
Okay, so now that we've got the science straight, let's dive back into those specific verses from the Quran and the Bible that people claim are talking about these exact scientific facts.
All right, here's a huge one from the Quran. The argument goes like this. The phrase a joined entity, or ratq in Arabic, is talking about a Big Bang singularity, that initial, infinitely dense point. And the separation, the word fatq, well, that's the explosion, the cosmic expansion that created everything.
And this is where it gets really interesting, because it shows you the core of the whole debate. For centuries, classical scholars read this verse and thought it was about weather. A joined or closed-off sky that gives no rain, and a barren earth. The separation was God making it rain so plants could grow. But then you have this completely different modern take that maps these exact same words onto the birth of the cosmos.
Okay, let's look at another one. This is actually the verse we opened with. And this one isn't about the very beginning, it's about what the universe is doing right now. And the absolute key word here is musion, which gets translated as expander.
And here's where things get really fascinating. The translation of this key word is actually changed over time. You look at an Old English translation from the 1700s, and it says God gave the heaven a large extent. Kind of sounds static, right? Just big. But fast forward to today, and many translations use dynamic words like expanding it, a choice that, consciously or not, mirrors our modern scientific view.
But, this whole idea isn't just in the Quran. If you go way back to the Hebrew Bible, in passages that are much, much older, you find strikingly similar language. The prophet Isaiah describes God stretching out the heavens, and that specific metaphor pops up again and again.
So what's the catch? Well, critics will tell you it's all about context. They'd say, look, this isn't about the physics of an expanding universe. It's about something anyone in a nomadic culture would instantly recognize, setting up a tent. The idea of stretching isn't a continuous expansion, it's the one-time act of setting up a canopy over the world.
Okay, so this all brings us to a much bigger question. It's not just about the words themselves, but how we even approach reading these ancient texts today in our scientific age. What are the rules of the game?
And there's actually a name for this. It's called concordism. It's basically the attempt to read a holy book and find harmony, or concord, with modern science, to show that the science was in there all along. You'll sometimes hear it called Bucayelism, named after a doctor who really pushed this idea.
But, as you might guess, academics and other critics have some major problems with this. They say, wait a minute, you're just cherry-picking the verses that sound scientific and ignoring the ones that talk about a solid sky or mountains holding it up. They argue it's inconsistent and really depends on the ambiguity of these ancient poetic languages.
And here's another crucial piece of context. This idea of separating heaven and earth was not unique at all. I mean, this was a super common theme back then. In Babylon, they told a story about splitting a sea monster in half to make the sky and the land. In Egypt, it was about separating the sky goddess from the earth god. These stories were just part of the air people breathed. So when you boil it all down, this entire debate is really just the latest version of a very, very old tension. The tension between religious faith and whatever the science of the day happens to be. It's a dilemma that's been around for centuries.
And believe me, this is not a new problem. Way back in the 5th century, a theologian named St. Augustine basically warned about this very thing. He said, hey, be careful about tying your scripture too literally to the science of your time, because if that science gets proven wrong later, it just makes your holy book look ridiculous.
And that gets us to a really tricky spot that theologians call the God of the gaps problem. Think about it. If your faith relies on proving God exists by pointing to the things science can't explain yet, what happens to your faith when science does find an answer? That's a pretty shaky foundation, right? Which leaves us right here with one final big question. Are these verses genuine scientific foreknowledge, like little clues left behind for us to find thousands of years later? Or are they powerful, timeless metaphors about God and creation that we in our modern world are just seeing in a whole new light, reinterpreting them through the lens of our own discoveries?